You need to have your lists and 2D lists notes open. This is the last thing that we filled in here where we were making new lists. And the last section is this bit that says 2D lists. So make sure you get to this point in your notes. We've talked about single variables where you just store one item in a variable. And we've talked about lists where you might have a lot of data that is related to each other and you store that all in one list. Now, if you've got more complicated data, you end up needing actually to kind of have lists of lists. And so that's what the situation we've got here. So in this instance, we've got 3 people who are posting online, Fred, Ginger and Hope. And along here, on week 1, Fred did just 3 posts. And on week 2, 4, on week 3, 5, week 6, and then 7. Okay. And then for Ginger, 33 in week 1, 44, then 5, then 66 and 77. So I could have a list of all Fred's number of posts, so 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or something like that. And then I could have a separate list with all Gingers and another one with all Hopes. Or I can have one list that has all of Fred's followed by all of Ginger's followed by all of Hope's. So that's what we're going to do, and we've kind of laid it out here so that at any time you could say, okay, I want to find out in week 3 how much did Hope go. So you go to Hope's list and you go along to week 3 where it coincides with week 3. Only made 1 post that week. And you might say, okay, what about Fred in week 2? You go to Fred's, you go along, you go to the week 2, and that's it there. Now I'm going to get rid of the week 1 and the Hope and all that sort of thing, and we're just going to look at this just with the data. So here we have the same data, but I've taken out Fred, Ginger and Hope, and each one is represented by 0, 1 or 2, and then the same for the week numbers across here. So remember, our indexing, the position in the list, starts at 0, and so that's what we've done here. So in list 0, in element 0 is 3, and then in list 0, element 1, index position 1 is 4, and so on. So that is your first list there, and then that's going to be followed by your next list here and your next list. So anywhere within this we can look at the rows and columns, and I can say, okay, column 3 row 2, what's that? Column 3 row 2, that's 600. So we're going to use the same idea, and each one has a unique position, and this is what we call a 2D list. It's got 2 dimensions. So in your notes you'll see that I've already filled in this bit, and what's important is that you refer to the row first, so the row first, so you're identifying which list you're going to look at, then the column. Okay, so when you're visualizing it, that's what you're going to do. So here we've got the name of our list, num post each week, and then square bracket to indicate that it is the start of a list. And then we've got our first list here, and I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see this. So you can see that that's the outer list here, and then that closes the outer list, and then in there we actually have 3 lists. And here's my first list, which is all the posts that Fred had, and then it closes that list, and then there's the comma that goes with that. Then I've got my next list, so all the posts that Ginger had, so let's colour that colour, and then a comma, and then here all the posts that Hope had, and then close it. So you can see each one of them is a separate list, and then they're all within another list. At this point you're going to want to pause the video, open up idle and open a new file and copy the text in, so num posts each week equals, and then make sure that you've got all the right brackets, the square brackets, and then you're just going to do a print there, and I will just show you how that looks once you've run it. It will just run that and it will just print it out on the screen like that, so exactly how it is in there. So write your bit of code now, and I'll leave that up on the screen for a minute. In the notes you'll see that what we want to do now is just to print one element from the array. So I've chosen 77 here. So what we need to do is find out which list it is in. So this was list 0, this one here. This one was list 1. So the first thing we need to know, because remember it's row then column, the first thing we needed to know was what the column was. So it would be column, the row 1, and then we need to know the column. So this is position 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So it's row 1 column 4. Okay, so let's do that in Python. Here I'm printing the list, the whole list. So if I want to find just the row, that particular row and column, then I use my square bracket and I want row 1, and then I want column 4. So let's run that and find out if that works. Okay, so you can see it did the whole list there, and then here it printed out just 77. So do 77 and then have a go at printing this one here, 999. In your notes I want you to make 2 snips. I want you to snip the code, so get your snipping tool, click new and then snip this bit here. It doesn't matter if you don't get the whole list in because it's quite big, but what you do need to have in is this bit here so that you can see how you wrote that. And then I'm expecting you to paste this into your notes here, and remember it might make it absolutely huge, and all you need to do is just make that smaller. If you click on picture format and then just change the width to 10 or something like that, and just make it smaller. Right, and then also snip the output, and that's what you're going to do for each one of these, and you're going to write how you did it. If you need to explain to yourself how you did what we did to solve this problem, that's what you need to snip and write in there. Remember, these are your notes that in 2 years time you'll be revising from these, so make them good. So I'm going to come back to this one, and the one we've just done is this one, display only the number 77. So you should have your snip in there. Let's go down onto this one. There's 2 things to do here. First, we're going to change the value for the third user, week 5, to be 150. So remember, the numbering is 1 out because it starts at 0. So the third user is in index position 2, and week 5 would be index position 4. So looking at our example here, we've got first user, second user, third user, and week 5 is currently at 0. I'm going to change that to be 150 so that I can see what it is before and after I make my change. I'm going to print just that value there, so the third user would be 0, 1, 2, and then the week 5 would be number 4 there. And just to set it, to assign it a new value, I just do exactly the same as I've done here, and then just equals, and then its new value. So that was 150. Now to check that that's worked, I'm just going to print it again. Like that. Let's run this. And you can see there, I'll just make it come up a little bit. It printed the 0 and then it printed 150 there. Okay, so run that program now and then try setting it to different things. For your evidence, get your snipping tool, snip that bit of code, go to your Word document and then snip that in here so that it's going to be in there. So click there and you can pop it in there, and you might want to also put the output in there so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so then the next one was to display all the values for the third user. In order to do that, I do the same, but I'm going to pick out, it's just the third user, and then I just put a colon in there and it will do all the data from the beginning to the end for that particular user, and you can see it's done it here. The next thing we need to do is display the number of posts from each user for the last week, so just from week 5. So this time what we're going to do is we're going to do something a bit more fancy. We're going to use a loop. So I'm going to use a for loop because it's a fixed number of times we're going to go round, and we're going to do it once for each user. Each user is a list within here. Okay, so that's how I'm going to find out how many times I should go round. I'm going to count how many lists are in the list. So here that would be my first item, second item, third item, and so on. So this would come up with 3, not 15, 3, because it's counting to the comma. Okay, so that's going to be row in range, the length of that. There we go. Okay, colon at the end, and then what's it going to do? It's going to print whatever the row is, so that will pick out which user it is, and it's just going to do week 5, so it will just do whatever's in 4 there. So it'll do it for each one, because it'll go round, and the first time row will be 0, then it'll loop round, row will be 1, row will be 2, and then it'll stop, because that's how long the list is. So give that a go, and if I just run that, so it does 7, 77 and 0. Now we will be doing 2D lists again next year, so don't worry if you're finding some of this a little bit advanced so far. Just follow through the program and make sure that you can just do what's on the screen, but next year you'll be doing it and thinking about really what do I need to do here. So the next one we're going to do is calculate and display the number of posts for each user. So for user 1, for Fred, I'd need to add 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 and say that's the number of posts, and then I have to add up Ginger's and Hope's. Okay, so let's have a look at our code. We've already got the first bit here because this will loop through each row, each user, and then inside of that what we're going to do is we're going to set up a total. So we'll initialize that total to be 0 because we want to count for each individual person. So I'm just going to call mine total, and I'm going to initialize that as 0, and then I'm going to have a loop within a loop to do the individual columns. So I've got another variable here, so this is my inner loop counter, col for column, in range, and this time it's going to count, it's going to find the length of number of posts each week just for that particular row. So row would be 0 on the first time, so it would be looking at Fred's numbers, and it would just see how many items were in Fred's. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same number in each list. You could have empty bits. So this is going to count how many things are in this item here, and it'll go, okay, there's 5 things there, so it's going to loop round 5 times, and the first time round col will be 0 and row would be 0. So now we can add that to the total. So I've got total equals total plus, and then here what this is going to do, it's going to select the next item it's looking at. So the first time round row would be 0 and col would be 0, then row would be 0 and col would be 1, and so on, and it keep going round that loop. Once it comes out of that loop, that means it's finished that entire row, so it's added up all that user's numbers. And you can print what the total is. So that'll be, it'll have looped round, added 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7, and then it'll come out the loop. Now it's not come out the second loop yet because it's still in there. So it'll print the total, then it'll finish that loop, and it will go and increment what row is. So now row's 1, and then it comes up here and it initializes total again, and then it goes through and loops through and adds it up again. So it's a loop within a loop. Remember, we call these nested loops. So have a go at that, and let's just run it, shall we? Okay, so you can see all the different numbers of posts there. Now you code it. Make sure you put your snip into your notes and put in any notes that you need to help you understand what we've been doing here. So write a few notes yourself. And the next task is this one, to add the number of posts for the 6th week. So remember, we had weeks 1 through 5, and this is what they're going to have for week 6. Then calculate and display the number of posts for each user over the 6 weeks. So we've already kind of done this once, and we're just going to do that bit again. But we need to know about adding. And if you think back to what we did with just regular lists, if we wanted to add something to a list, we used .append. And so we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to use .append, but in a very specific way. Now previously what we would have done is given them the name of the list, but actually the thing we want to append to is this list here. We want to add week 6 stuff into this list, so it's a list within a list. So the name of our list is actually this whole thing here. It's number of posts in each week 0. That would be Fred stuff. And then we're going to use .append, and then in the brackets you put the thing you want to add onto that list. And so we're going to add 300, so it would go in here. It's appending it to this part of the list. And I've run that once, and you can see here that it has added it. Okay, so I'm going to just do the same for lists 1 and 2. So this is being added to that list there, the one that's in position 1, and then this is what's going to be added to the final list, the one for Hope. And then what we need to do is we need to display what the totals are. So we've already done this once here, so I'm just going to copy this and pop it here, and it'll add it up and do it once, and then it'll add in these week 6 things, and then it'll show what the new totals are. So let's run that. So you can see there, those were the original values, and now with it added on, what the new totals are. Whenever you do things like this, where you see yourself using the same bit of code, that's when you need to start using subroutines. And we have talked a little bit about subroutines, but we will be doing it again soon. So have a go at this piece of code. 2D lists is a big leap, so you might find some of it a little tricky, but introducing the concept this year means that when you have to do it next year, you'll understand it better because you've already seen it once and understood it. This year, as a minimum, you should need to understand how to add things to just regular lists, but ideally understand, not necessarily remember how, but understand how you would go about doing adding things to lists and how the layout of the list works.